Welcome back to another episode of Married Now Widowed. We're your hosts. I'm Kayla.
And I'm Nadine, and this podcast is about navigating life after loss through unfiltered conversations.
Welcome back, guys, to another episode. This is a very special episode and one I've been really excited about this.
Yeah, we've had this one on the list for a while.
Probably over a year.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We have a very special guest.
We do have a very special guest.
Yeah.
We have Noelle.
Mm-hmm. Welcome.
Yes, welcome. So Noelle and I have known each other for a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
She's a lawyer.
Yeah.
And when Mick passed away, there was a lot, after he passed, there was just a lot of, legal things that I needed to go through. And to be honest, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where to go, how to go about it.
Yeah.
And then Noelle was the first person that I kind of reached out to.
So, you guys knew each other before Mick had passed away?
We did, yeah.
Right,
yeah,
okay.
we did.
Okay.
Noelle's been my lawyer for a while. So she's done like my business stuff and things like that. So, so I think, I reached out to Noelle and then, honestly, you just made everything so easy for me.
It's so good to have someone like that in your corner at a time like that.
Yeah.
Because really, unless you've been through it before or for some reason you're really well versed in law, which most people aren't unless
that's right.
you have a legal background.
Yeah.
You have no idea what you're doing, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So tricky. It's hard to navigate. I can imagine she would have been like...
And I also just think it's really important, and we both had discussed this. There are a lot of people who go through something similar to what we've been through and just don't know what to do. I know that there should have been certain conversations that I should have had with Mick before he passed away, and as you know, we never had those conversations. And so I think when you're in that moment and, you can see that your partner, your husband, your wife dying, it's not something that you want to speak about. In hindsight, should we have had these important discussions? We probably should have had these discussions even before he even got sick.
Yeah.
Just as when you get married and you're starting to build, your life together, they're just very important conversations that you need to have. And, we didn't have that. And so I think that's why it was very...
And I don't think most people do, to be fair.
Yeah.
I think unless maybe someone in your position would have these conversations because you know what happens if something were to happen. But I think your average person probably wouldn't have those conversations, especially if their spouse isn't unwell. Do you know what I mean?
That's
it's
exactly
like a weird
right.
conversation to kind of just bring up.
And I just think that educating people on having, their shit together pretty much is on top of the list for me, because I just feel like it is so important. And again,
it is.
Your partner, you don't have to be dying. It's just something that needs to happen.
That's right.
So we've got a series of questions for you.
Certainly. So we're going to do Q&A style.
Yeah. Do you have a disclaimer before we start?
We do have a disclaimer,
Yep.
ladies. So obviously what I am about to talk about is not tailored advice.
Yes.
It's not personal advice.
Of course.
So each individual needs to assess their own needs.
Of course.
Everyone's circumstances will be different. So I would advise that when it comes to each individual that they seek professional legal advice.
Of course.
And what I say is general advice only.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Not to be relied upon.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Okay, so let's get into maybe before a spouse passes away. Okay, so we just touched on this. So I guess what are the most important legal documents couples should have in place?
So couples should be talking to each other, okay? And I know it's a tough conversation to have.
Yeah.
But particularly when you're both healthy, you might not think about it.
That's
right.
right.
It's not something that comes to mind.
Right.
And especially when somebody is sick, it might be a bit sensitive to broach the topic.
Yeah.
But what I say to people is always be in a state of preparedness.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you are in a state of, if everything is prepared, you're on top of your game, you're on top of all your documents, you're on top of your estate plan, it doesn't matter at what time of your life, if you're constantly keeping on top of these things, then it's no longer a taboo, right?
Yes, that's right.
And it's like a safety net. So you would go to a doctor when you feel sick, right?
Yeah.
You would go to a chiropractor
Yep.
when you have a sports injury. You go see osteo or a chiro or a physio, right? So it's the same thing. You just should be treating these sorts of things like you would with any other
That's right.
thing in your life. It's something that you must do for yourself.
Yeah.
It's something that you should have in place to protect you and your
Yep.
family.
Yeah.
So the kind of documents I would say should be part of all couples in their tool bucket is a will, an up-to-date
Yep.
will.
Will,
So
yeah.
each spouse should have a will. And the will itself is an essential document. It specifies what your wishes are and how
Yeah.
you would like for your assets to be managed beyond your death, and how they're to be distributed among family members, among friends, among who you would like to
Yeah.
give away your assets to. So a will is of utmost importance to have. Yeah, that's
Okay.
number one. Engage in comprehensive estate planning. So what I mean by that is seek professional advice, legal and financial advice, and understand your asset position. Some people have significant assets, so they may like to protect themselves even further by potentially establishing a trust. So that comes with a whole raft of pros and cons that you will have to obviously engage with the professionals who will take you through and tailor the advice to you. I would say that getting an enduring power of attorney,
Yep.
having that in
Yep.
place is, if not the most important document during the life of your spouse. It will come in handy, particularly where there is a decline in health.
Right. And they can't make decisions.
They can't make decisions for themselves. It will ensure that as a trusted spouse, that there's continuity there, that you can
Yep.
continue to act on their behalf, even in the event that they lose capacity.
Right.
So that's an important distinction between a standard power of attorney
Yes.
and an enduring power of attorney. The enduring power of attorney survives beyond mental incapacitation.
Right.
So I like to make sure that those
Yes.
are key documents that we
Yes.
have in place. Other documents include an enduring guardian,
Mm-hmm.
an enduring guardianship. So whereas an enduring power of attorney will allow decision making in relation to financial and legal matters, the enduring guardian will assist with making decisions in relation to lifestyle and medical care
Right.
and those sorts of things. So the non-legal and financial.
Right.
Having a life insurance policy
Yeah.
in place with the designated beneficiaries always being kept up to date.
Yes.
Right.
Noelle's
So-
looking at me because that wasn't my
Yeah.
case.
Yeah, life insurance policy could be very important. And an advanced health directive as well, which is otherwise known as a living will. Now, what that does is it ensures that the person who becomes sick can leave instructions and their preferences around how they would like their medical treatment to take place. So their
Right.
desires
Okay.
in
Yeah.
relation to their medical care and end of life care.
Right.
So
Right.
it's called an advanced health directive or living will.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also add that maybe a funeral plan,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
right? So sometimes you can leave those sorts of instructions in your will, but if you have a comprehensive funeral plan in place, you may like to take the burden away from your spouse and also prepay for your funeral
Yeah.
expenses. I know it does seem quite daunting, but it will, in the long run, it will avoid unnecessary emotional burden and toll
That's right.
on your spouse, especially when they're going through a really critical and emotional time beyond
Yeah.
your passing.
These things that you've mentioned, like just listening to you talk about them, gosh, it would make people's life so much easier if this was all in
It
place.
would, but when you were speaking about wills, something that came to mind was it's when you think of a will, you think of like these successful people who have all of these assets that, you know, they can do a will, right? Yeah. But when you think about it, like I bought my first business, and at the end of the settlement, Noelle sent me an email and was like, okay, now you should consider, you know, doing a will.
Yeah. Yeah.
That at the bottom of, and I was like, oh, wow, okay. So it doesn't really matter how wealthy you are and how many assets you have. It doesn't matter at the end of the day.
I think as well, when you have children too, that's something. So when my husband passed away, I mean, I was young. I think I can never remember my age. I think I was 24 or something. So I had never thought about a will before. A will to me was like, you hit a certain age, you do a will then. Why would I need a will? I'm in my early 20s, right? But it was so funny, like when my husband passed away, and all these conversations started coming up with family members about assets and, you know, this and that. I think within the first few days, I remember calling my girlfriend, and she has a really good lawyer, and I'm like, help, like I need to do a will. And she's like, oh, okay. And because I was like, oh my God, number one, I'm the last living parent of this child. Number two, there is so much to it. Like I need this. And I remember I was like on this rampage. I was this will advocate for like 3 months after. I remember I called my girlfriend yelling at her, and I'm like, if you haven't done a will, you need to do a will. Everyone needs to do a will. I was just so, and I couldn't believe it wasn't something that I thought of before, but I guess I just thought, I'm so young, like what's going to happen to me? But really anything can happen, especially when you're a parent too, right? And you've got a child. And then I think it became even more daunting when I was the only carer of that child. I was like, oh no, if something happens to me, this is really bad now, you know? So that's within the first few days, I was like, someone help me, I need a lawyer, I need to write a will. So, but you're right in terms of when you said, make it like a conversation that happens in the home, because I think it's a bit taboo, and I think sometimes people get a bit funny, like, why are you talking to me about that? Like I'm not dying, what's happening to me? But you don't have to be sick to die, right? Anything can happen to anyone at any time, and you
can walk out the door now and something can happen to you.
So
and see, the thing is as well, if you do have a will in place, you can prepare for those events of life where, you know, you have minor children. You can appoint a guardian within your will as well. You can have greater say in what happens to your assets.
Should something happen to you.
Children, you put in there, you can even put in there your funeral arrangements, what you would like, your preferences. I have a friend who gave me very specific instructions about how she wanted her funeral, and you know, she wanted white flowers everywhere, and a specific song to play, and those sorts of things. And you know, you do need to have a really good, hard think about what you want to happen. And if you can sort of forecast that and put aside that it is, you know, you don't want to think of it because it's something that you don't want in your mind. You're safeguarding yourself.
That's right.
And once you do it, you know, make it a habit that you regularly go back to it
and update
update, make sure it still contains the most current wishes and reflects. You know,
look, I know that it can be quite daunting. I know from my brother, when he, you know, first did his will, he rang me and he was like, man, like the lawyer killed off like every living person in my family. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, because they give you scenarios, like what happens if I die? What happens if my wife dies? What happens if me and my wife die? Like, you know what I mean? And he was like, it was the most, you know, just daunting thing. Like he was...
Of course,
he found it so difficult, but then after that, he was like
relieved, probably.
So relieved because now I've got my shit together. Like everything's in order. If anything happens to either one of us, we've got a plan.
That's right. And I think, you know what? That's just reality, and these are just the hard chats that you have to have, because this is what happens, right? People die. This is normal, and I feel like
totally.
Make it a habit to have those hard chats.
I agree.
You know, it's when it's your first time approaching the subject, I can imagine it can be really daunting. But once you overcome that hurdle and you treat it, like I said before, as if it was, you know, you're going to the doctor, you're getting your medical checks done, just think of it as doing your taxes.
That's right.
That's right. Something you have to do.
And I'll get into my experience a bit later and what I went through because my husband didn't have a will, and he didn't have beneficiaries on his super. So mine was like a whole. How long did it take us? A year? I think it was 11 months,
That's
just
huge.
under a year.
And I'm sure you've seen a lot longer processes, but still big. A year is still big to be talking about it and bringing it up and whatever. And, in fact, I actually think that it's probably a bit easier to have these conversations when people aren't sick.
That's
right. I mean?
right.
So as much as it might be a bit taboo, like why would we be having this chat? At least you guys are both healthy, right?
That's
and
right.
no one's implying that, you're sick, so you probably won't be around.
Exactly.
You're both healthy. You're both, whatever. It's probably
really
the time to have the
it.
chat, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I know we spoke a little bit about power of attorney, but did you want to elaborate more on that?
Yeah, sure. So I talked earlier about the distinction between getting a standard power of attorney done and an enduring power of attorney. I do believe that for married couples, that the enduring power of attorney should be the arrangement to put into place.
Okay.
If you both trust each other.
Yes.
Your spouse should be the most trusted person in your life, right?
You would think.
So if you don't have an enduring power of attorney, what could happen is that, say, your spouse actually suffers mentally and is on a decline and then deteriorates to the point where they no longer have mental capacity.
Right.
The standard power of attorney will not safeguard you.
Oh,
you
wow.
cannot utilize it.
Okay.
It no longer becomes valid. So you need the enduring power of attorney in place that you ensure continuity and that you can do things on your spouse's behalf without needing court intervention or without having to go to NCAT, which is the tribunal where you actually have to go and apply to become a guardian. So to avoid all of that, if you had an enduring power of attorney in place to begin with,
you won't need to go through any of that.
All of that.
Can I ask, sorry, just on a limb here, do you see often where a spouse is not appointed as power of attorney, where the husband or the wife chooses someone that's not their partner?
I do.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I see often where they choose their accountant or their
Really?
Wow. I was just curious. Because I know, this day and age, a lot of people don't trust their partners, unfortunately. So I was just curious, is that something that happens?
Sometimes it's not about trusting or whatnot. It's about, my wife or my partner really doesn't like this sort of thing. I don't want to put that burden on them.
Oh, right.
So I trust my best friend who happens to be a lawyer.
Right.
Or I trust my mum.
Yep.
Or my brother, my sister.
Yeah. Right.
And then what if you have a power of attorney and it's somebody that's, or really it could be anybody, but what happens if they pass away? You just have to update.
The power of attorney is no longer valid.
Yeah, so you'll need to update it.
You'll have to create
a new one. Okay.
And if you haven't updated it, then you're in trouble, right?
Well, you can put in your power of attorney that there's an alternative person, but there are rules around that, and there needs to be an acceptance by the attorney. So they should all be aware
of course.
part of it and consent to it in effect. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay. What are some common mistakes couples make when preparing their estate plans, and how can they avoid them?
Well, we've already touched on this quite a bit, but failing to have those hard conversations, failing to put into place an estate plan, failing to update their legal documents, especially when there's a change in circumstances.
And I think that's really important because I think, as time goes on, things do change, right? And people might not think that they need to update their estate, so
for sure.
That's
Absolutely. You might have new children to add.
That's right.
And you've specified your other children, and then failed to add the last two.
That's right. Yeah.
It appears as though they've been excluded from the will.
Yeah.
So in order to avoid that, I would say you need to regularly update your documents. Seek professional advice. Engage in comprehensive estate planning, and just ensure that you're constantly thinking about your circumstances. Right? Have I changed? Is there a change in dynamics in my family situation? Have I gone through a divorce? We'll talk about that a bit later because that's a big one. So failing to just keep on top of your affairs.
Sorry, I have to jump
No,
in. I've
no,
got so
go
many
for it.
questions.
Yeah, go for it.
And this is probably more opinion rather than it's not really legal, like a legal thing. Do you think people should share what they've put in their will with their family members?
Absolutely.
Oh, you do think you should have an open discussion about that?
That is actually one of the key things which would avoid problems down the track.
Yeah, right.
The amount of people that could have saved thousands and thousands of dollars in legal costs had they had a conversation before things got tough, before death, or even after death. If they had approached each other and had those tough conversations, thousands and thousands of dollars would be avoided. And unnecessary legal costs, and time and energy and emotional.
That's
burden.
right.
So have those conversations, even with, the family members that you think, okay, they're not going to receive a share. They might not be too happy about that, but let's have a conversation about it.
Because you hear those stories all the time, right?
That's
where
right.
A child was excluded and it's a big thing and they're taking their siblings to court over, so you hear that all the time. Yeah, but I was wondering, if you
will talk about that a bit more because that's I think it's a separate scenario where it's, and being completely excluded where you ought to have been included is another thing. But in general, having open communication and dialogue with family members ensures that you actually manage expectations.
That's true.
And can potentially avoid future
for sure.
legal action.
I think we've also just covered the next question, which is what steps should someone take if they're anticipating the death of a spouse and want to minimise potential legal issues later on?
Yeah, that's the biggest one, the conversation.
The biggest one is the conversation itself.
I agree.
So sometimes people actually share the will itself and say, okay, everybody, this is actually what my will contains. So
really? They do that? Wow.
Of what's in it.
I've heard that. I've heard people doing that. Yeah.
And then sometimes there's negotiation that can happen before the death, right?
Right.
And
I think that's wild.
You can still change it. Isn't it wild? You can still change your will, right? But if you know, okay, when I die, I have no more say in this, but everyone's going to turn on each other, right? How do I avoid this?
Yeah.
Right. What's the smart thing to do?
Yeah.
Have the conversation.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Does in New South Wales, does a verbal will hold any power at all?
No. There's a subject of many litigation, we would let's not go there.
Okay.
Because that's like a whole other thing.
Really?
I would say just to avoid any of that.
Just do it the right way.
Do it the right way. Yeah. Go see a lawyer.
Yeah.
You get a proper will done. There are disputes over improper execution of wills itself.
Yeah,
right?
I've heard that too.
So that can actually be contested. A will can still be contested. Even if you think you've done it right.
Right.
Whole raft of issues can ensue.
Yeah.
There'd be allegations about undue influence.
Yes.
Got somebody in the room with you.
Yes.
Or it appears as though you've been pushed into it.
Yes.
You've got somebody who's exerting a lot of power over you and emotionally abusing you. You hear about elder abuse.
That's right, yeah.
Where there's allegations of testamentary capacity. Like we talked about mental incapacity.
Yeah.
Now, there are instances where even though you've lost mental capacity, you may still have legal capacity to draft a will.
Right.
So there are tests that lawyers can undertake to assess whether a person has the requisite legal capacity to draft a will. But there are challenges to wills where there is an allegation that the person lacked testamentary capacity, so the requisite capacity to draft a will.
Right.
And the other key claim or allegation where someone's trying to, set aside a will is improper execution.
Yeah.
So in order to avoid all of that, it's best to see a trusted legal advisor, draft a will, make sure there's nobody in the room with you, make sure that you have...
that's right.
You give your instructions to the lawyer, you have the conversations before you lose capacity as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But even despite losing capacity, there are instances where you could still update your will and, avoid all the pitfalls of not having a current will.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are the first legal steps a widow or widower should take immediately after the death of their spouse?
Look, it is, when we say the word immediately, I think that's...
Yeah.
we wanna
Not like
say-
tomorrow, but yeah.
Exactly. Look, obviously, you don't have to do anything that, the very same day.
Yes.
Take your time, grieve. It is a big shock to the system. Even if you did expect it, it was a long time coming. There was
Of course.
a long-standing illness.
Yeah.
It is still daunting. It's a daunting prospect of,
Absolutely.
I just lost my partner.
Yeah.
What legal steps should I be taking?
Yeah.
So I would say just take your time,
Mm-hmm.
Allow yourself a chance to breathe and heal and grieve and collect your thoughts, right? But the very first steps I would say is organise all your documents, make sure that, your will, the life insurance policy, superannuation, anything that you have in your toolbox that you think that will be required down the track, make sure that's all organised and in a state of readiness.
Yeah.
Another thing is to obtain copies of the death certificate,
Yeah.
make multiple copies and ensure that they're certified, and notify financial institutions so that they are put on notice
Right.
that your spouse has passed away.
Right.
Yeah.
So those would be the first things. And then when you're ready, engage with a lawyer who will commence the probate process or letters of administration if there is no will. We can talk about that as well.
And I think on that, it's so important. Look, I know that sometimes people don't have a lot of time because people want to know what's going on with the will, what's happening with this, what's happening with that. But I think it's really important to at least give yourself just a little bit, because I actually don't think, back when my husband first passed away, I thought all the decisions that I were making were very sound and very logical. But looking back, wasn't logical. It wasn't sound. Your husband's just died. You're not going to be so logical. So I think it's really important just to give yourself a little bit of time. I know you don't have all the time in the world and things do need to get moving and there are people waiting on, stuff to happen. And you yourself as a wife or as a husband are also waiting on things to come through. You could be left with no money and you're waiting on, whatever. But just to at least give yourself just a little bit, even if it's just a week. Because I know with me, we started quite quickly on all that sort of stuff, and it was a lot. And as I said at the time, I thought, it's cool. Like, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm saying. I know what I'm asking for and not asking for. But looking back, I probably needed just some more thinking space. Yeah, and just some more time to actually think about, because you're just running on emotion.
Yeah, you are.
So I think that's important, just to give yourself a little bit of time. So what are the pitfalls of not updating your will?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks, Kayla. Look, there are, as I said before, there are obviously circumstances in life. We all go through changes in dynamics in our family life, in our relationships, new children. So definitely you need to keep those things in mind. But there's certain things that you probably don't think about, right, where you probably really should be thinking about, hey, hang on a minute, do I need to update my will before I do this?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, if you foresee that, or to the best of your ability, if you foresee that you're about to embark upon a life-threatening journey, for example, travel, or you're just about to go into a major surgery, or you want to go skydiving, for example, any of these sorts of things where there's a risk to your life, as to the best of your ability, think about updating your will before you do those things, because I see it time and again, right? I'll give you a recent example. There was an elderly man who has early stages of dementia, has an existing will, but it needs to be updated because he's excluded certain people that should have been included, and it was an oversight. But before he had the opportunity to update the will, he decided, I'm going to travel overseas to see my other family or whatnot, and I'll do it when I get back. On the plane, mid-air, he suffered a serious stroke and nearly died. So very close to dying. And, so somebody who's already, on the cusp of, hey, does he have capacity?
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
elderly person then goes and travels. Something happens midair.
Yeah.
Or even as he's overseas, like, you know, you're in a foreign country.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't know what can happen to you. Should have updated his will.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Because again,
that's
it
one
goes
example.
back to you never think it would happen to you.
Well, I was just going to say, I would have never thought of like a big surgery or skydiving or something, but it's right. Anything that threatens your life, right? It makes sense.
To the best of your ability.
Think about it. Yeah. Yeah.
You have to actually consider these things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Anything that has a potential to risk your life.
Yeah.
To the best of your ability. You
Yeah,
should
that's right. You can't
forecast
foresee
that.
everything,
Yeah.
but the stuff that you can sort of, that makes sense.
Another really important one as well is after a major life events, for example, a divorce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll give you another example.
Yeah.
A client of mine had a life insurance policy in place, but the designated beneficiary was his ex-wife.
Right.
And he
Okay.
had completely forgotten about that life
Yeah.
insurance policy and forgotten who actually was on there. That, you know, and had he known, had he done a regular health check on his legal documents, he would have been aware and would have updated it. So he didn't update it. He should have made, an assessment at the time.
So if I'm married to my husband and he's my beneficiary and I get a divorce, it doesn't mean anything unless I go and change that.
Yeah, you have to update
He's
it.
still
When it comes to matters like life insurance policies,
Yeah.
they go by who's your designated beneficiary. So
Right.
you need to ensure that you're updating those designations.
Wow.
Similarly with the superannuation fund, it's actually beneficial if you can do what's known as a binding death nomination. So that then means that the distribution of the superannuation that you hold with a super fund will go to in accordance with your wishes. Right?
Okay.
So it's a similar concept. There are times when these sorts of assets may form part of an estate, but it is rare and it's known as a notional estate. So it can form part of the estate, but generally speaking, these sorts of assets do not form part of a person's estate.
No,
in your estate plan.
because Mick's superannuation, he didn't have any beneficiaries, like nobody.
Yeah.
Right? And so he was my beneficiary on my super. And then obviously when he passed and I was going through the process, the first thing I did, I logged on and I put my children as the beneficiaries.
Yeah.
But and
And
it's
I think
not something
most
that
people would think that because Mick didn't have anyone, it'd automatically be you. 'Cause you're
Right.
his wife. Do you know what I think most people have that thought process when it comes to this legal
and
stuff.
that may be in
Yeah.
some cases correct,
Yeah.
but there's a whole process that
it's
you
not
have
just,
to go
you
to.
guys were married,
No,
there you go.
like I remember, the courts had come back to Noel and they were like, we need affidavits because we need to know that he didn't have another partner with other children out there.
That is it's so complex.
Yeah, and
Like,
then
it's just,
how do you prove that? Like,
there's so much to
You
it.
know,
There's
yeah.
so much to it. You guys
Yeah.
have a hard job.
I used to see Noel on my phone going, oh, what do they want now?
I think in your case, Nadine, though, we will talk about the other aspect, which is when you die without a will. So when you're ready to talk about that.
Yeah. All right. So I think not a lot of people know what a probate is. So maybe if we can go through what's a probate, how does it work, how long does the process typically take, and how can someone make it smoother?
Sure. Okay, so probate is actually a legal process of validating a person's will and authorising an executor to administer your estate.
Yes.
Right? So the person that you've nominated on your will becomes legally authorised to administer your estate and deal with your affairs.
An executor is very different to a beneficiary, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So the executor, think of an executor as like a trustee.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and a legal representative on behalf of the deceased's estate.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's someone who just executes the will
Executes the terms of the will.
to the way you wanted it.
The way that it's supposed to have
Yes.
been drafted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The terms of the will. That's right.
Right.
So the process typically takes anywhere between several months to, I've seen over a year.
Right.
It really depends on, the complexity of the estate, maybe the court has a backlog to deal with, and also in the process itself, how long it takes you to collate the documents, to prepare the assets and the assets and liabilities inventory, to obtain the death certificate, to put together all the key things that you need in order to actually make an application to, in New South Wales, the Supreme Court. So yeah, it can take time. So yeah, it's...
Yeah, I know these things are generally like a long process. Like you can't expect something to happen, you know, overnight or in a week, or, you know, they just take time, I guess.
Yeah.
But a lawyer will guide you through that
Of course,
process.
yeah.
So I wouldn't expect somebody to know how to navigate.
Yeah.
Especially when there's a complex estate.
Yes.
And, you know, you've got shares over here.
Yeah. Things
over there.
everywhere.
It's not straightforward.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
So I guess in terms of your question around how to make the process smoother, well, obviously if you have your up-to-date will, up-to-date estate plan, and if you've done some pre-work, like putting together an assets and liabilities inventory, you're setting the scene, you're helping yourself for the probate process that will eventuate beforehand. So, you know, if you've gotten, all right, so I know my partner's got a shares here, he's got an investment here, maybe you can do it together, right? So I'm talking about if you could have done it prior to death and you sat down with each other and you're aware of your financial positions, you're aware of what, you know, the other person owns, what's owned jointly, what's owned in tenants in common, what's owned, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
If you had that assets and liabilities inventory, that will go a long way in
Right.
helping make the process a lot smoother, because you don't have to do as much investigation, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to go, okay, I need to find out where are these assets? Where am I going to pull all these assets together? Does he have an account here? Does he have an account there? The court will look at that and say, okay, well, this is quite comprehensive. Everything is listed. You still have to do your due diligence, of course, because there are things that you may not know about, but it will go a long way in helping let the process be a lot smoother. Right?
Okay.
The question I have around an executor, what's the point of an executor if someone has a will and they've got all of their wishes in this will and how they want things to be distributed amongst their family, whoever? If there's a will in place, why do you have an executor?
The executor is the key person who's actually authorised to handle the estate. And
But wouldn't that be the lawyer that would do that?
The executor would appoint a lawyer, right?
Okay, got you.
Right. Okay.
They will engage in a lawyer.
Okay.
There are times where the executor is the lawyer.
Right.
So
yes.
that's the trusted person that the
Oh,
person
okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
wants
right.
to actually
Yeah.
administer the estate. So they'll nominate a law firm. That's you know, a person who works within the law firm.
Yeah.
They know, they trust, they can do that. Otherwise, the executor will engage a lawyer so that they can help guide the process, facilitate everything,
Yeah.
help with the administration side, so that it's not all on an executor. Because you can imagine sometimes the executor is the spouse, and the spouse is going through a really tough time.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? Spouse is not going to say, okay, how am I going to look at these terms of this will
That's right.
and
Yeah.
know what to do?
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, help me.
Yeah.
So, of course, seek help, and help is available.
Right.
Lawyers are able to help you in
Of
all
course. And sorry, another one. If you have a will and you have a lawyer and you've not told anybody about it, right? What are the living people meant to do? How are they meant to, can someone, like, do you guys have a database where you, okay, all right.
We don't have a database,
Okay.
no. What happens is that's a process of trying to locate a missing will. But so in order to avoid that, right,
Have the discussion
You
and
have to
tell
have the
people.
discussion.
Yeah, okay.
keep a copy of the will
Yeah.
somewhere safe, like
Yeah.
in a safety deposit
Yeah.
box, at the bank,
Yeah.
you know, with your lawyer,
Yeah.
with your accountant, with your spouse, together with all the other important documents. But there is a process if you can't locate,
Right.
And if your spouse is aware of who you actually use as your lawyer, that'd be the first step, right? Ask them.
Go to that lawyer, of course.
Did my husband leave a will? I'm
Yeah.
his spouse.
Yeah.
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 He's passed away. Here's a copy of his death certificate. I need to find his will.
Yeah.
I cannot locate
In the
it with these
instance that
documents.
obviously that you haven't had that conversation.
Yeah.
Because then if at the end of the day, if there is no will, then you essentially you die as an intestate.
Yeah.
The person actually dies as an intestate, which actually just means that there is no will for the deceased.
Right.
And that goes down a whole other path.
Yes.
Right? Which we can talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Can I just throw one question? Because I just have so many. Wills, how much these days? What is it costing someone? I know it varies.
It does
I
vary,
can
yes.
imagine. What is it? The
think it would be
average
up to the
person
lawyer,
looking at?
right?
It's up to each lawyer.
Yeah.
I've seen them as like $300 plus GST for a
Oh,
simple
okay.
will.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
They do vary. Obviously, depends on the structure,
Of
course.
the
Yes.
complexity
Yeah.
of the estate.
Yeah.
Whether it's a large value estate, a small estate.
Yeah.
If you're doing mutual wills, if you're doing more than one will, I mean, there could be
Yeah.
Yeah,
deal,
of course.
package deal that
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, cool.
3 for the price of 1
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, I was just wondering because I know we have like obviously our audience varies, but we do have a lot of like young people as well. And with the cost of living these days, I feel like young people, we put those things to the side because we're like, oh, it's too expensive,
Yeah.
even though it's like the most important thing you
That's
can
right.
do. So I was just trying to get an idea, like, are these people having to get out loans to make
Yeah.
a will, or is it like something that? So
No.
that's good to know.
hopefully,
for them.
go to the right lawyer and
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
won't
Yeah.
charge you an arm and a leg
Yeah,
for
yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's reasonable.
Yeah.
But think of it as this way. It's your safety net. It's
Yeah.
it will help safeguard you in the long
Definitely.
run,
Yeah.
especially if it's well put together and comprehensive and thought through.
Yeah.
Like one other thing I want to actually touch on, if I may, is, and it might lead us into the next topic.
Well, I was just going to ask you the question. So.
In order to avoid having legal issues down the track, for failing to actually consider your circumstances when you're putting your will together, is ensuring that you're aware of who may actually be entitled to a share in your estate. Right? Putting a hat on and going, okay, people out there could be entitled to my estate, and I'm actually excluding them from my will. What are the repercussions, right? So
Yeah.
you need to consider who is entitled to your estate and why you're not stripping them away from their entitlement. So, for example, what I mean by that is you have 2 kids. You're only giving half of your estate to one of them and the other half to your spouse, and one of the children miss out.
Yeah.
Why? The law would question that.
Mhm.
Why did you exclude this person?
Yep.
He or she is an eligible person. We would expect that you would leave a share, adequate provision for your children.
That's right.
So you need to put those sorts of thoughts in your head when you're considering making a will, because down the track, the person who is excluded can come and attack the estate.
Yeah. And then that's a whole
Claim.
process, and then
Make a
that
claim
could
against
take
the
even
estate.
longer, right?
But
Absolutely.
ultimately, you don't have to, right? Like, if I don't want to give my children anything, I don't have to.
You don't have to, but they are entitled as eligible persons to seek a family provision claim and commence that process, which is a whole other thing altogether.
Yeah.
Quite costly. So what I'm trying to say is knowing who is eligible to make a family provision claim.
Right. Okay.
You
it's
need
quite-
to understand that it will be inevitable that person will try and claim against the estate down the track. So
What
leaving
if-
them something, or putting down like a comprehensive memorandum that talks about why you've excluded.
Oh,
it could
okay.
help.
That was going to be my question.
It could help. I'm not saying it's foolproof though, because ultimately it's it becomes part of court intervention,
Yeah.
that sort of thing, and there's laws in place.
Yeah.
I just can't believe that.
No, I know, but my question was going to be, and not that I would ever do this, and I don't think you would ever
it
do
just
this
makes me
either.
angry.
But like, what if, like, let's just say you do have, a parent or whatever who wants to leave half, like you said, to the wife, and then the other half to the eldest child, but the youngest child doesn't want to give them anything because they didn't have a great relationship or whatever the situation. What if that is actually their wish? Like, what happens
That
then?
could be their wish, but that's not what the law will
Okay.
I'm shocked. I didn't
Yeah.
know that. I can't believe
It has to be. Look,
Yeah.
I've seen cases where even, there's extreme violence, there's AVOs, there's a long history of, abuse and estrangement, right? But they still end up,
They still win it? Like they're
really?
So what if they leave them a little portion?
Then, is it adequate though?
Because that's what they've... No.
Is it fair? Is it adequate?
Yeah.
These are sort of the things
can't
that
believe
we
this.
have
I
to
did
weigh
not
up.
know this. I
Yeah.
had no idea that was the case. I'm shocked.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's many of these sorts of cases
Yeah.
out there. So
Wow.
Interesting.
Wow.
it's actually a big area of law.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So family provision claims, it's some law firms, that's their bread and butter.
I'd love to hear stories from those people.
We've got all
Maybe
day
we
to
should
talk
ask
about
our followers if you guys have any
send in
stories, send them through to us.
Yeah. Wow, I can't believe that.
Okay, so my next question would have to be, if someone doesn't have a will, what are the steps that they need to take? Yep.
If someone doesn't have a will, as I said before, they die as an intestate, and there are rules known as rules of intestacy, and basically the law stipulates how the assets are to be
Divided.
distributed. So there's actually a scheme of distribution, right? So if you have a spouse,
Children.
only, then it goes to the spouse. If you have multiple spouses, it could be between them shared equally.
That is
or by
crazy.
agreement. If you have a spouse and children of the relationship, then it still goes to the spouse, because ultimately, the spouse will have
Looking after the children.
access to the children and whatnot. If it's the spouse and children of another relationship, then that has another
Yeah.
rule. So you need to look at the scenario, and then it will basically be going by what the law says needs to happen.
Yeah. And I think that's what happened to me. So Mick didn't have a will. Like I said earlier, he didn't have any beneficiaries on his superannuation. And so when I called the super company, they were like, you need a letters of administration. I didn't know what that was. Literally just
Never heard of that before,
Never
right?
heard of it before. I had spoken to my brother. My brother had said, yep, you need to get letters of administration because there is no will in place. And I'm like, it's just super. Like, I'm his wife. I've got his death certificate. Didn't matter, right? It was just like, no, this is what you need. And I was like, okay. And to be honest, it was quite overwhelming because I didn't know what to do. I didn't like it. I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I'm the wife.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, right?
It is straightforward.
Yeah.
They will just give it to me.
Yeah.
That wasn't the case, obviously. And so I contacted Noelle and I was like, I need a letters of administration. This is what I'm being told.
Yeah.
And then we started the process. Do you want to share what that process was?
Yeah, so it's a similar process actually to the probate process in essence. It's still an application. You get a grant of letters of administration, and instead of an executor, you have what's known as an administrator.
Yeah.
So it's sort of the similar concept, and then you'll be able to administer the estate by following the rules of intestacy, right? So that's how you would actually navigate that process with the help of a lawyer, but it's a similar concept to probate, right? So just think of it as, okay, you die without a will, letters of administration, you die with a will. Hopefully the will is valid and then it's not going to be challenged, but
Probate.
The process for that would be probate.
Okay. Yeah.
It's funny because you really think you have a lot more authority than you actually do as a wife or a husband. You think if you're married under the Australian law, it binds you guys together. You're entitled to do things on his behalf after he passes and vice versa if it was your wife. And I remember really things that I thought were really simple. Like I remember calling one of the finance companies for his car, and I wanted to see, he had passed, and I wanted to see what the outstanding finance amount was. And they're like, oh, we can't talk to you. We have to talk to him. And I was like really emotional. emotional, whatever. I'm like, well, he's dead, you know? And they're like, okay, but we still, like, who are you? And I'm like, his wife? And then, then they were like, no, like, that's not how it works. We need to, like, who's the executor of the will? And we didn't have a will at the time. And I'm like, there's just me. Just talk to me. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, we can't talk to you. Really, things like that. And I wasn't even trying to do anything with the car. I just wanted to know the figure. And even that I couldn't get, you know. And I was under the impression or the understanding that I had all this
you
authority,
were the wife,
right?
and that you can. Similar thing happened to me with just the phone bill. So both of our numbers were on the account, and I just rang, and all I wanted to do was minimize his plan. Like I just wanted to bring his plan. I wanted to keep the number, and I just wanted to put it on a lower plan. Yeah. But who are you? And I'm like, his wife, but he's passed away. Well, we need a letters of administration. A letters of administration for a phone bill, a plan. Who's going to be paying the bills? Like I'm going to be paying the bills. So I got the shits, and then I ended up just porting our numbers to another network because I'm like, screw you. Like at the end of the day, I'm all I'm asking you to do is just. How long is a letters of administration going to take?
I know.
It took me 11 months. You want me to sit here and pay all this money for 11 months? He's dead. Like at the end of the day, why am I wasting money? You know, all I wanted was to lower his plan. That was it. They wouldn't let me. Right? And we were in COVID at the time. I cracked the shits and I was like, nah, I'm not doing this. I rang my business partner who owns Vodafone. He called his cousin. His cousin rang me. He's like, yep, what do you need? I'm like, I just want to port my numbers. And he's like, yeah, okay, what do you want? What plan? I'm like, I want to keep mixed plan. Yep, no worries. What plan do you went through the whole thing? They came out, did everything, came over, dropped off the SIM cards to me, and it was done. And I'm like, well, I don't need to talk to you guys anymore. So,
it's frustrating. It's really frustrating. Just the other day we had this with my Hey You or my Netflix or something. I had like multiple accounts and I didn't realize. And I'm thinking, why do I have so many like Hey You subscriptions? This is so weird. And I spoke to them and they're like, oh no, one is coming out of your account, but it's for Mohammed, like my husband's full name, whatever. And I was like, oh, he's passed away. Can we cancel that? They're like, no, he needs to cancel it. I'm like,
but he's how
are we going to do this? And you get so frustrated and you're just like, okay, so how do you want me to do that?
It's a Hey You account.
It's $6 a month.
You've got to remember that each institution or organisation will have their own policies in place for deceased estates. And some of these people really they lack a lot of that.
I do agree.
Understanding, compassion. And look, not everything needs a letters of administration or a probate to be able to access. Like you should be able to say, here's a death certificate.
Right.
I'm the spouse. You want my marriage certificate.
Exactly.
I'm the next of kin. Can I please... Well, what are your processes that I need to follow in order to, get a payout figure?
Or what can we do? Like, help me out a little bit, you know, because these people...
speaking to the right people will...
Definitely, I agree.
You don't just speak to sort of somebody who isn't really across
the ins
and outs.
That's right.
All right, maybe I need to speak to your manager.
Yeah.
This is serious. Like, I'm a widow. I'm after something relatively simple. It should be quite... clear cut,
100%.
It's an administrative task. What do I need to do in order to do X, Y, Z without having to experience the cost and burden of going to seek letters of administration? I was going to mention as well, and it probably is a good segue here, in terms of applying for letters of administration or probate, you don't necessarily need to do it if the estate is small.
Right.
Okay. If the estate is small, if there's no need, like you go to an institution and they don't require it, and you have multiple institutions where each one of them don't require it, well then what's the point of you having to go through the expensive process to get it done? It is good to have it done so that it's like, everything's organised, I'm safe, I've done the right thing, I've executed everything in accordance with my mandate, but sometimes it's not actually required. So you really do have to maybe talk to a lawyer, assess your situation and see, look, if it's, for example, probate, if it's a small estate and you've got $20,000 sitting in this account, $5,000 sitting in that account, bits and bobs here and there.
Yeah.
And there's no real property, there's no real estate. Well, you might be able to seek an exemption from their policy.
Yeah, right.
Do I need this? Do I have to go through this process? And sometimes you don't. So another time you don't need it is if all assets are jointly held.
Yes, of course.
Instead of the asset having actually going into the estate pool, it automatically passes to the surviving owner.
Yep.
And you bypass the need for that asset to be administered altogether.
Yeah.
Right? All you would have to do is, prove that you're the surviving owner and maybe provide a copy of your death certificate.
Of course.
And satisfy certain requirements, obviously, but not necessarily needing to obtain probate for certain things. So it just really depends on what it is, what the asset is, the nature of the asset.
Of course.
The requirements and processes of the institution and organisation that holds the asset.
Yeah. Even just to touch on what you said earlier about maybe speak to a manager, I had a similar issue as well, and that was just with our private health insurance, where I just obviously wanted to remove him off there and it just, me and the children. Yeah. And that was an hour-long conversation where, again, they asked me for a will or a letters of administration, and that was just for private health insurance. I asked to speak to a manager because I'm like, okay, well, just cancel the whole thing. Or don't cancel it, keep it. I'll go to another private, health insurance company and I'll just transfer everything to them. And so anyway, I ended up speaking to a manager and he just said, look, no problem. I'll keep everything that you have, all your benefits and whatever, because we've had it for years. So, you've got things on there like hospital cover. And if I was to transfer all of that, I would lose all that and I'd have to be on a wait list. Yeah. And so he said, no problem. I'll just create another account with you and your children. And then when you get the letters of administration, please just email it to us. And that was it. So you're right in that, not all companies or institutes will require. Sometimes it may involve just speaking to the right person.
You may not have any assets at all. So what is there to administer is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
You die without a will, right? But then you actually don't own anything.
Yeah.
That's right. In your name. So what is the point of going through the process? So it really depends on your situation. Obviously, speak to a lawyer.
Yeah,
definitely.
Assess what your requirements are.
Yeah.
You know what I find funny? I remember I had that speed bump with so many different companies where they wouldn't let me act on his behalf for anything. But then when it came to me paying something on his behalf, it was all on me. I remember at Commonwealth, wouldn't give me access to see what was in this account, whatever. But then they had a credit card that they found for him and they're like, there's your bill, it's now yours. And I'm like, oh, so you're happy for me to pay his credit card bill, but you won't tell me what's in another account. It just didn't make sense. There were so many of those things. That actually
leads me to my next question, which is, how do you handle a spouse's debts when dealing with the estate?
Right. So whether or not they had a will, whether it's the probate process or the letters of administration process, the estate is expected to essentially settle their debts, right? So the administrator or executor should be making sure that all debts are paid before any distribution is made.
Yeah.
Right? So that's your number one thing you have to do. Okay. So funeral costs, liabilities, whatever the liabilities of the estate are. Mortgages, if it's personal to the
individual,
deceased, so it needs to be covered by the estate, right? So
wow, okay. So for example, if I have $1 million mortgage remaining and I also have $1 million cash in my bank, but I've chosen that $1 million goes to my 2 kids, they don't get that. The mortgage gets my $1 million and the kids get nothing. Is that essentially?
Well, if the mortgage is held in your name only,
my mortgage,
you must pay your debt, right?
Okay.
So it's...
Can they not take over the...
Oh, no, it would depend on, obviously, the institution, right? So they might say, no, we have to... You'd actually have to do a full payout, a full discharge of mortgage.
Wow.
And because the children might not be able to cover...
That's right.
debt, right?
Yeah.
So you really got to speak to the financial institution, but essentially debts must be repaid, and that would include credit card debts, mortgages.
And if you have nothing, you can't repay them. I died, I've got nothing.
Well, then your class is an insolvent estate.
Okay.
Right? And there are rules around that as well. And, it's sometimes you can negotiate to wipe off a debt with the institution.
Right.
Right? So if the estate cannot pay its debts, its class is an insolvent estate.
Interesting. Wow. I didn't know that. It makes sense though, because if you've got money in the bank and still mortgages to be paid, it makes sense that would all go to that. And then potentially the people that you've left this money to might get nothing, essentially.
Well, they don't, because no, they will get something. Because if you've got $1 million in the bank and you've got $1 million on your mortgage.
Not a mortgage, maybe credit cards or stuff like that, stuff that you're not going to give to. Yeah, that's crazy.
So the key thing to take away here is that you need to settle your debts before the estate can be distributed to the beneficiaries. So it could be that there is no estate to distribute, right?
Yeah.
As after making those payments.
Yeah.
Which is quite sad, but it can happen.
Yeah.
So it's important that's why you should create that comprehensive assets and liabilities inventory.
Yeah.
Which then you would be able to see, okay, we've got all these assets, but all these liabilities. If this will end up being an insolvent estate, right? So everyone who's expecting a big payout, guess what? There's nothing.
That's
wow.
funny. I never thought of it that way. I had never thought of that before.
Can you tell us a bit about what happened with you?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit, but one thing I will say is I'm very lucky because my family, we all worked really well together and it wasn't a super dramatic thing.
By family, you mean your husband's family?
Yes. Everyone collectively agreed that I'm his wife, I've got his child, on those sort of lines. But my husband had a will because he was sick for about 8 years. So he had a will in place. Our legal team is actually family as well, which actually worked in our favour because they sort of understood the situation, they understood the timeline of everything, and they also had those conversations with him with regards to, this is what I want to do. So with my husband, what happened was he was sick for a long time, but his death was actually quite rapid. It wasn't expected. We knew he was obviously sick. He had stage 4 cancer. It was a whole thing, but he died within sort of a 3-week period and we weren't really expecting him to die then. So obviously, as I said, our legal team is family, so they were obviously at the hospital just supporting him and etc. And those conversations came up and they had to be had, which was good, thankfully. And he obviously wanted to have those conversations too because he wanted to protect me and his son. He gave another verbal announcement of what he had decided. And it was like everyone was sort of caught off guard. I had actually just walked into the room when he said it, a few people walking out, and we just all sort of heard it at the same time. And he made this like completely different announcement of what he wanted, which was, as I said, our family really supportive. It was just, I feel like I'm really blessed because I do hear a lot of situations where family are not so on board and someone wants this and someone wants that. Everyone sort of was on the same page and everyone agreed as to what the right thing to do was and made it an easy process for me as well. My brother-in-law is a lawyer, so he sort of handled pretty much everything, and he was the executor of the will also. So he handled everything, but I think we did have to file for letters of administration. But thankfully for me, family was on my side.
Made it easier for you.
It
was an easy process, but it's funny, like not funny, but just that last little, he was literally like, it was just a random thing where he just said, oh no, this is what I want. And we're all just kind of like, oh, okay, did you hear that? Did we all hear that? So but thankfully, no, it was a smooth process for me. But there were bumps along the way in terms of what I explained to you before with the cars, with the Commonwealth Bank, with, stuff like that. Even, little things like the phone bill company, stuff like that was a little bit bumpy and we had to, but again, thankfully I had my brother-in-law who, again, he's a lawyer, so he just had this down pat. He knew what he had to do. He knew what documents he needed. He knew what had to be done. So thank God for him. I really did nothing. That's the truth. I did
And
not
that
have
goes
to do
back
much.
to what I said before, that
That's right.
sometimes people actually do nominate somebody not their spouse, so that they can take away the
And
emotional
thank
burden,
God.
Definitely.
Yeah.
and you know, safeguard the emotional well-being of their spouse,
Absolutely.
because it is a daunting process.
Yeah.
And there are challenges, there are bumps along the way, there are things that you have to navigate through.
Definitely.
And look, a lawyer will be best to guide you through
And
that
to
process.
be honest with you, not even like from an emotional perspective, but even just from knowing the law. Like I'm so glad my brother-in-law had that responsibility and not me, because I know nothing about this stuff. I've never been through it before. I was really young at the time.
Yeah.
Thank God. And to be honest with you, my husband could not have appointed a better person. Like my brother-in-law, he's just like, if you want someone for your will, it's him. He's honourable. He's just with whatever the person wanted. He takes his emotions out of it. He doesn't have that sort of bias because it's his brother. And he was just like, I'm so thankful. My husband made a great decision.
Even with you, Noelle, like going through the process with you as well, you also made it like extremely easy for me. Like I know we had to have tough conversations sometimes, and you know, I think as a lawyer it's your job, right? You've just got to get to the point. But even then, like I remember we had a conversation and she was like, look, take your time, like don't stress about it, but this is what we need to do. And it was at my pace, which is what we were talking about earlier, and you really made it easy for me. And honestly, like I'm gonna cry.
I know, I get it. Yeah.
It was like a really, really hard time in my life.
Yeah.
And it's just things that you don't want to go through.
That's
like
right.
you're already going through grief. You're already going, and then just like having to speak to people. And I remember even just like going to the bank.
Yeah.
And just standing there and telling them my husband died. Like that was just
Very
a difficult, you know, conversation. But you know, you did most of that for me. Like you were contacting all the banks and you were letting them know. Obviously there are things that I needed to do. I needed to go in person and provide, you know, death certificate. And then when I got the letters of administration, provide that as well. But you were a lifesaver at the time, definitely.
Her, right, though, in times like that really, like, they might not think they're doing anything out of the ordinary of their job, but it makes life a lot easier because it is a really hard time and it is like,
Thank you.
This is like, you're very emotional. I don't want to cry. Oh, dear. No, you're going to make me cry now.
No, it's fine.
Don't.
It's fine.
It is tough to navigate, right?
Yeah.
And this is why I say that appoint the right person.
That's right. Yeah.
Who you trust.
Yeah.
To help guide you through the process
I
and
agree.
facilitate and, you know, take care of all those administrative things for you. You know, have those calls, fill out those forms, help you fill out the forms and take away the stress, right, that you might be feeling, and help you, talk you through the process, allow you to understand the framework, and, you know, hopefully make it simple for you and for everyone.
Of course.
Of course. Thank you so much, girls. Go again.
Thank you so much for having me today, girls. It's really been my pleasure.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you.
So much for coming on. And we get so
on.
many questions of this nature.
Yeah.
So it's been so great for you to be able to provide a bit more of an insight for us. So we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Guys, as always, Married Now Widowed on all platforms. If you have any questions, any comments, anything you want us to talk about, please hit us up. And also follow our Facebook page at Married Now Widowed. And we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.